"You useless old woman. Get out of this house, you don't belong here." His words cracked through the storm like a whip, and the heavy wooden door slammed shut behind him. My suitcase landed in a pool of muddy water at my feet, splashing against my soaked shoes. Rain poured down from the black sky, soaking my coat and hair until I could hardly see. Madison stood just beyond the gate, her arms folded, her face twisted into a mocking smile. She tilted her chin, her eyes glinting with contempt, watching me like I was nothing more than garbage thrown to the curb. My hands trembled as I bent down to lift the suitcase, but it was heavier than I remembered. The water had seeped in, the leather darkened, and my strength was no match for the weight of humiliation pressing down on my chest. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, but the words stuck in my throat. Behind the iron bars, I could still hear Matthew's voice echoing in the courtyard. Laughter mixed with the clinking of glasses, as if throwing me out was a cause for celebration. The lights of the mansion burned cold, distant, and unwelcoming, while the rain kept falling, each drop reminding me how utterly alone I had become. My body shook from the chill, but the deeper shiver came from the realization that my own blood had cast me out without mercy. They stood in the foyer, black coats still damp from the funeral rain, yet their eyes refused to meet mine. Just minutes earlier, I had been standing at my sister's funeral, surrounded by a hall full of relatives and friends dressed in mourning. My sister's portrait still hung above the mantel, candles flickering beneath it, but the reverence for her memory ended the moment their gazes shifted toward me. Matthew shoved me closer to the door, while Madison leaned in, her voice sharp enough to cut through the silence. "We need to clear out the trash your mother left behind." Her whisper was not meant to be hidden. It carried easily to the ears of the cousins and uncles lingering nearby. Their faces tightened with unease, yet none stepped forward. One cousin lowered his gaze to the marble floor. Another clasped her purse tighter, pretending not to hear. I stood frozen, my dignity unraveling thread by thread, feeling the weight of their silence heavier than the rain outside. Matthew's grip bruised my arm as he forced me through the doorway. My breath caught, not from the chill, but from the shame that pressed against my ribs. I had been a sister, a caregiver, a woman who shared their blood, yet in this moment I was nothing but an intruder. The crystal chandelier above sparkled mockingly, each glint a reminder that wealth could blind even family to decency. My chest burned with humiliation, but I lifted my chin, determined that their cruelty would not be the final word. I lowered my gaze, letting them think their cruelty had silenced me, but inside my voice rose louder than the storm outside. They believe I have nothing, that I am a burden to be cast away. What they cannot see is the truth I carry within me. At this very moment, hidden beneath layers of secrecy and trust, I hold the key to a fortune so immense it could alter every life in this room. $700 million in private gold reserves, safeguarded in a Swiss vault, placed under my care by the sister they just buried. They call me useless, yet my hands alone can unlock what they crave most. The irony bites deep, for while they gloat and sip their wine, convinced of their victory, they are blind to the fact that I am the guardian of a power far greater than their petty schemes. I feel the paper still folded in my pocket, the weight of my sister's words heavier than any insult they throw. Her trust is my armor, her foresight my weapon. Let them sneer, let them laugh. Each cruel word they fling only steels my resolve. They will soon discover the price of underestimating me, for I am not the shadow they imagine. I am the keeper of her legacy, and I will decide who is worthy to inherit it. The iron gate slammed shut behind me, the echo ringing in the night as if sealing a verdict. The mansion lights blinked out one by one, leaving me standing in the rain, a silhouette against the storm. I clutched the suitcase tighter, water dripping from my sleeves, but my heart no longer trembled with fear. Their laughter still lingered in my ears, but inside me a different voice rose, steady and sharp. They will soon learn that their contempt was the greatest mistake of their lives. For the gold my sister left behind was never meant for the greedy, nor for those who squander without thought. It was meant for someone worthy, someone who could carry her legacy with honor. I whispered the words to myself, a promise etched in the storm. The night swallowed me whole, but I walked forward, every step driven by the weight of what I carried. $700 million in pure gold, bound not to their arrogance, but to a trust placed solely in me. Who deserves such power? Who among them, or beyond, could rise above hunger for wealth and prove themselves fit? That question hovered like thunder, waiting to break. I lifted my chin against the rain, knowing that soon their sneers would turn to silence, and their triumph would rot into fear. Helen was my older sister, the pillar of our family, and the kind of woman people both feared and admired. She carried herself with a quiet authority that came from years of standing firm when others collapsed. In the boardrooms of Manhattan, she never raised her voice, yet her calm stare silenced even the loudest rivals. She built her empire from nothing, deal by deal, until her name was etched into the financial circles that once dismissed her. I remember long nights when she worked by the glow of a single lamp, her pen steady even as markets spiraled into chaos. Recessions swept away fortunes, but Helen endured, adjusting with precision, never losing her balance. To her, money was more than wealth. It was a test of the soul, exposing greed in some, fear in others, and rare integrity in a chosen few. She often told me that money was a mirror, and only those with honesty could look into it without shame. Her laughter was rare but full, the sound of a woman who knew her victories came not just from profits, but from survival with dignity. Her fortune was vast, but her true legacy was the discipline and wisdom forged in every storm. She taught me one lesson that stayed with me always. To endure is one thing. To endure with honor is everything. Matthew was my sister's firstborn, and he carried himself with the arrogance of someone who thought money would always fall into his lap. He paraded through life in designer suits, flashing luxury watches he had bought on borrowed credit. Nights were spent on yachts with champagne bottles spraying into the air, days in trading rooms where he gambled fortunes on coins and reckless stocks. The banks had already issued warnings of margin calls, yet he brushed them aside with a laugh, convinced he could bluff his way out of ruin. His charm was shallow, the smile of a man who lived on appearances while drowning in debt. At his side was Madison, his wife, as beautiful as she was dangerous. She had a way of lowering her voice to a whisper, her words curling like smoke into Matthew's ear. She knew exactly how to prod his ego, how to turn his insecurities into greed. Whenever he hesitated, she would press her hand lightly on his arm and murmur that he deserved more, that his mother had owed him everything. Madison's beauty made people underestimate her, but beneath the polished surface was calculation sharper than any blade. It was she who pushed Matthew deeper into schemes, encouraging him to reach for what was never his to claim. And then there was Nathaniel, the younger son, whose heart was too big for his own good. He dreamed not of yachts or stocks, but of serving in humanitarian missions, traveling with aid groups to places most people never dared to go. He wanted to heal, to build, to give. Yet his kindness was also his weakness. He trusted too easily, believed too readily, and I knew it would only take one signature on the wrong paper for Matthew to strip him of everything. Nathaniel's innocence was a light, but in a house where shadows thrived, that light was forever at risk of being snuffed out. Helen knew better than anyone the dangers that lurked within her own family. She loved Nathaniel for his gentle heart, but she could see how easily that same kindness could be turned against him. If the fortune ever passed directly into his hands, Matthew would find a way to twist it. All it would take was a single document placed before Nathaniel, a single moment of misplaced trust, and everything Helen had built would be siphoned into Matthew's reckless ventures. She had watched her eldest son gamble on coins and volatile stocks, watched him throw away money on yachts and endless parties, convinced that wealth had no end. She knew if he ever touched the reserves, the gold would melt away into greed, leaving nothing but ashes of vanity. In her final days, Helen wrote in her journal with a steady hand, each word carrying the weight of decades of sacrifice. All my life I have guarded what we earned, and I cannot let the legacy be burned in the hands of the greedy or the naive. She paused after the sentence, staring at the page as though speaking directly to me through the ink. Those words became the spine of her decision, the reason she crafted a will so carefully, splitting what was visible for appearances and locking the true heart of her fortune in secrecy. She knew that wealth was not just money, it was the essence of her life's work, and she would entrust it only to someone strong enough to protect it. Helen's mind worked like a strategist, even in the quiet final weeks of her life. She understood that if her estate appeared unequal on the surface, lawsuits would follow. That was why, in the official public document, she left Matthew $1.5 million and the family mansion. It was just enough to prevent him from crying abandonment in front of a judge. For Nathaniel, she provided $500,000, sufficient to live without hardship, but not enough to attract predatory hands. Those amounts were deliberate, a shield against accusations, a facade meant to calm restless greed. But behind that facade lay the truth only a few would ever know. Helen had arranged for her greatest treasure, $700 million in gold reserves, to be held in a Swiss vault under a strict bailment contract. Every bar was insured by international policies, its weight and serial numbers catalogued in meticulous detail. It was not money that could be gambled on reckless trades, nor flaunted on champagne nights. It was a legacy locked away until the right moment. And to guard that legacy, Helen named me, her younger sister, as custodian. She trusted me not because I was wealthier or wiser, but because she knew I would not bend to pressure or manipulation. The secret clause rested in the hands of Samuel, her lawyer of 30 years. He had drawn up the papers with airtight precision, ensuring that nothing could be forged or challenged. His instructions were clear. Only in my presence would the sealed supplement be revealed. If Matthew and Madison tried to twist the will, they would find nothing but walls of legality standing in their way. Helen's foresight extended beyond her grave. She knew her eldest and his wife would claw at every scrap, but she left them only what they could not contest, while placing her real fortune into my keeping. I became the guardian, not of mere wealth, but of her judgment, her faith, and the heavy responsibility of choosing who might be worthy of her life's work. Before the funeral even took place, Madison began to wear a mask of tenderness. She hovered near me with a soft smile, asking if I needed rest, if I wanted water, her words coated with sweetness that fooled the cousins watching. They whispered among themselves that she was thoughtful, a true comfort in a difficult time. Yet beneath her polished manner, I caught the flick of her eyes, sharp and calculating. When she leaned toward Matthew, her hand slid onto his arm, and her voice dropped into a whisper that brushed the air like a blade. "You must demand a larger share. She cannot be allowed to keep anything." The venom in her tone pierced through the facade of gentleness she wore so well. Matthew's lips curved into a thin smile, his head dipping in agreement, and in that instant his hunger eclipsed any shadow of grief. His eyes gleamed, no longer clouded by mourning but lit by greed. I stood silently, watching as their act unfolded, realizing how quickly love and sorrow had been traded for ambition. The funeral had not yet begun, my sister's body not yet laid to rest, but already the vultures circled. Their false kindness was only theater, staged to distract those too polite to question it. I understood then that the battle over her legacy would not wait for the prayers to be spoken or the earth to close over her coffin. It had already begun. The room still smelled faintly of lilies from the funeral, their sweetness clashing with the bitterness in Madison's voice. Only hours after the burial, once she and Matthew had learned the contents of Helen's will, her mask of courtesy vanished. She stood near the fireplace, her posture elegant, her eyes sharp as glass. "Why are you even here?" she said loudly enough for every cousin and uncle to hear. "You never contributed a thing. You lived off your sister all your life." Her words cracked through the air, stripping away any veil of civility that had lingered. Matthew leaned forward in his chair, his voice thick with disdain as he added, "She has no place in this house anymore. It's time she left for good." His words hit harder than the rain outside, echoing in the silence that followed. Around the table, relatives shifted uncomfortably. One aunt pressed her lips together as though to speak, but she lowered her gaze instead. Another cousin fiddled with his cufflinks, eyes fixed on the floor. No one defended me. I stood in the center of the room, the weight of their silence pressing down heavier than Madison's insult or Matthew's dismissal. My cheeks burned, not just with shame, but with the sting of betrayal. The chandelier above cast a cruel light, illuminating me like an accused standing trial with no advocate. They thought they had cornered me, stripped me of any value now that the will had been revealed. Yet beneath my silence, a fire flickered. Their cruelty was public, but so would be the reckoning. The night deepened, and Matthew's patience snapped. He dragged my suitcase to the gate and hurled it into the rain. I stumbled after it, my figure swallowed by the storm, framed in the harsh glow of the mansion's lights. The cold soaked through my bones, every drop a reminder of rejection. Behind me, Madison pushed the door shut with a cruel finality, her mocking laughter echoing against the stone walls. Their cruelty gleamed brighter than the chandeliers inside, a spectacle for any who cared to see. Inside the mansion, crystal glasses clinked as Matthew and Madison poured champagne, their laughter spilling over like the foam in their glasses. They boasted about plans to secure the rest of the estate, speaking as if victory was already theirs. Madison dangled visions of yachts and Paris boutiques, while Matthew bragged of investments that would turn gold into endless profit. Their celebration reeked of arrogance, a hollow triumph built on cruelty. Yet at that very moment, in the darkened streets beyond the gates, Nathaniel was searching for me. His face lit with alarm when he found me drenched, trembling in the rain. Without hesitation, he stripped off his coat and draped it around my shoulders, guiding me gently toward his modest apartment. The warmth of his home was humble but genuine, a stark contrast to the cold splendor of the mansion I had been cast from. He fetched towels, kneeling at my feet as he carefully dried my hands, his voice low with worry. Then he moved to the kitchen, clattering pots and pans until the air filled with the scent of broth. When he placed the bowl before me, steaming and fragrant, his eyes held no calculation, no hunger for gain. They held only concern. As I lifted the spoon, tears blurred my vision. In that moment, the contrast between the brothers cut deeper than any words could. One celebrated greed, the other embodied kindness. Just before Helen's funeral was held, I slipped quietly into her old room. The house was already filled with guests in black, their voices hushed in the halls, but I knew this might be my only chance. The curtains were drawn, and the dim light revealed a small safe in the corner, hidden under one of her shawls. My hands felt cold as I turned the dial, listening to each click echo against the silence. At last the lock released, and the door swung open. I expected to see money, jewelry, perhaps family documents, but instead there was only a single envelope. It was sealed with wax, stamped by a notary, its edges crisp and untouched. I held it carefully, the weight firm in my hand, heavier than I imagined. On the front was my name, written in Helen's familiar script, steady and deliberate. A chill went through me as I realized she had prepared this moment long before her death. This was no ordinary paper. It was the hidden part of her will, a secret meant only for me. Beyond the prayers, beyond the flowers waiting downstairs, my sister had left behind something that could change the future of our family. I pressed the envelope to my chest, knowing I would not open it until the time was right. I broke the wax seal with trembling fingers, the quiet snap of it loud in the stillness of the room. Inside was a folded sheet, handwritten in Helen's steady script, alongside the stamped certification of Samuel, her trusted lawyer. My eyes moved across the page slowly, as though each line carried her voice back to me. You are the only one I trust. This gold is not for the greedy, nor for the naive. Watch closely and choose the one truly worthy. If no one deserves it, let it rest in the vault. The words struck me with the weight of iron. It was not only an inheritance but a duty, a burden that could not be shared. I could almost see her sitting at her desk, pen in hand, her expression calm but firm, preparing for the storm she knew would come after her passing. She had chosen me not for wealth or power, but because she believed I would not bend, that I would see beyond masks and pretenses. My chest ached as I pressed the paper against me, her handwriting blurring through my tears. In that moment, grief and responsibility merged into one. Helen was gone, but her faith remained, binding me to a secret greater than any fortune. I was no longer just the younger sister, I was the keeper of her legacy. The storm outside still raged in my mind, the memory of Matthew's shouts and Madison's laughter clinging to me like the rain on my skin. They thought they had cast me out, a useless old woman with no claim, no power, nothing but shame. Yet as I held Helen's secret in my hands, the truth burned brighter than any insult. I was the guardian of $700 million in gold, locked safely in a Swiss vault beyond their reach. Every thumping heartbeat reminded me that I alone held the power to decide. I could strip them bare, leave them with nothing but debts and hollow pride. I could protect Nathaniel, shielding him from his brother's hunger and his sister-in-law's schemes. The irony tasted sweet, sharper than champagne, richer than all their boasts. They celebrated my humiliation, but unknowingly, they had placed themselves at my mercy. Their future, whether wealth or ruin, rested in the very hands they had pushed into the rain. I lifted my head, the sting of shame fading, replaced by a steady fire in my chest. For the first time since Helen's passing, I felt her presence, as if she stood behind me, guiding my resolve. They thought I was powerless. In truth, I was holding the sword that could sever their ambitions, and I would not hesitate to use it. I pressed the paper tightly in my hands, whispering into the silence as if Helen could still hear me. Sister, I will keep my promise. Only when the one truly worthy reveals themselves will this gold be passed on. The words steadied me, a vow that wrapped around my heart like steel. I chose silence, deciding not to confront Matthew and Madison yet. Let them drown in their own greed. The deeper they sank, the clearer their true faces would become, and the more undeniable their downfall. With Samuel at my side, I began to peel back the layers of their carefully crafted image. He produced financial records, statements hidden behind false smiles and flashy clothes. What we found was damning. Matthew had been hit with margin calls from brokers, his reckless bets on stocks and crypto collapsing into ruin. The debt piled higher than he dared admit, a ticking bomb ready to explode. Madison's schemes were no less desperate. She had been calling private bankers, trying to leverage the family mansion for loans to fuel their lavish lifestyle. Designer gowns, glittering parties, whispered promises of wealth, they were nothing but smoke hiding a crumbling foundation. To the world, they appeared powerful, untouchable, heirs to a grand fortune. But behind the polished surface, their empire was already rotting. I kept the knowledge close, letting them prance in arrogance while I held the truth like a hidden blade. They thought I was defeated, but I was waiting, watching, and preparing to strike. Samuel spread the papers across his desk, his face grim as the glow of the lamp revealed the ink. "These," he said quietly, "are not authentic." I leaned closer, my eyes catching the irregular strokes, the mismatched notary seals that bore names I had never seen before. They were clever, but not clever enough. Madison had arranged for false documents, emails that hinted at hidden supplements to Helen's will, each one crafted to suggest that more wealth had been concealed from them. The plan was clear. They meant to march into court, armed with forged signatures and fabricated witnesses, to accuse me of withholding what they claimed was rightfully theirs. It was a tactic as old as inheritance itself, dressed in the modern guise of digital correspondence and notarized stamps. I felt a chill as I realized how far they were willing to go. To the outside world, it would look like a legitimate legal dispute, one sibling against another. But Samuel shook his head firmly, pointing to inconsistencies, reminding me that the law had sharp eyes for such deception. Their arrogance blinded them, but in their desperation, they had left a trail of errors. I gathered the papers into a neat pile, my resolve hardening. If they wanted a courtroom battle, I would let them walk right into it, carrying their own lies like a noose around their necks. Samuel slid the footage across the screen, his jaw set in anger. The grainy image showed Madison in the dimly lit kitchen, her eyes darting toward the hallway before she pressed an envelope of cash into the butler's hand. Her lips moved slowly, the microphone catching just enough to chill my blood. As long as she drinks that glass of wine, no one will stand in our way. My breath caught as I realized the glass in question had been mine, offered at dinner only nights before. I remembered the way Madison smiled as she handed it to me, her tone syrupy sweet, urging me to toast in Helen's memory. A tremor ran through me at the thought of how close I had come to becoming a silent casualty, erased not by cruelty in words but by poison in wine. The footage played on, the butler shifting uneasily, then nodding under Madison's piercing stare. Samuel froze the image, turning toward me with eyes that asked the question neither of us spoke aloud. This was no longer a battle over money or property. It was a struggle for survival. They wanted me gone, not just from the house, but from life itself. The realization sank deep, sharpening my resolve. If they thought I would retreat, they were wrong. Samuel and I sat long into the night, the table between us covered in files, flash drives, and notarized papers. Every piece of evidence was gathered carefully: bank records showing Matthew's reckless debts, emails with forged signatures orchestrated by Madison, and the damning security footage that revealed their true intentions. Samuel spoke with calm precision, each step outlined like a battle plan. Tomorrow, he would contact the Swiss bank to reaffirm my custodial rights over the gold reserves, secured under bailment and backed by international insurance. The vault, untouched and immovable, stood as a fortress of proof that no one could dispute. I agreed to remain silent before Matthew and Madison, playing the part of the weak, defeated relative. Let them believe they had stripped me of dignity. Let them laugh and sneer, for every insult only sharpened the trap tightening around them. I moved through the house quietly, carrying their contempt like a cloak, knowing that arrogance would push them to expose themselves further. Their greed was the loudest voice in the room, and I needed only to listen. As I folded the papers back into their envelope, I whispered to myself words Helen once told me in the middle of a boardroom storm. In business, silence is the sharpest blade. I only need to wait until they cut themselves with their own ambition. The thought steadied me, turning my grief into steel. The great hall of the mansion was lit by chandeliers, but the air was heavy with tension. Matthew and Madison had summoned the relatives, their voices carrying a false authority, as if they were already masters of the estate. Madison rose first, her tone sharp and commanding, eyes narrowing at Samuel. "Surely there are more assets," she insisted, suggesting with a sly smile that Helen must have hidden wealth somewhere beyond the official will. Her words dripped with calculation, stirring whispers among the cousins seated along the polished oak table. Matthew leaned back in his chair, his laughter cutting through the room. "My aunt has no rights here anymore," he declared, his gaze sweeping toward me with open contempt. "Look at her, still clinging to a place that no longer belongs to her." The room grew silent, relatives shifting in discomfort, some glancing at me with pity, others avoiding my eyes altogether. Samuel cleared his throat, his calm voice reminding them that the will had been executed properly, and nothing further could be claimed without evidence. But Madison pressed harder, weaving doubts, her hands slicing the air as she spoke of hidden accounts and concealed fortunes. I sat quietly at the end of the table, my posture bowed, as if their words had defeated me. Inside, however, I measured every sneer, every accusation, knowing the more they revealed of their greed, the stronger my case would become. Samuel rose slowly from his chair, adjusting his glasses as the room fell into uneasy silence. His voice carried clearly, every word slicing through the air as he unfolded the sealed document. "This is the supplemental clause to Helen Whitmore's will, certified and notarized." He paused, allowing the rustle of anticipation to settle before continuing. "The $700 million in private gold reserves do not belong to Matthew Whitmore or Nathaniel Whitmore. They are placed entirely under the custodianship of her sister Catherine, who alone holds the authority to determine their eventual heir." The words echoed through the hall like a thunderclap. Matthew's smirk collapsed into disbelief, his lips parting as if to argue, yet no sound emerged. Madison's eyes darted wildly, searching the faces of the family, her composure slipping like shattered glass. I rose to my feet, my hand steady as I placed a small device on the table. The screen flickered to life, displaying the grainy footage Samuel had secured. Madison stood in the kitchen, sliding an envelope into the butler's hands, her voice low but unmistakable. "Just make sure she drinks the wine. Once she does, no one will stand in our way." Gasps broke out across the room, the cousins recoiling, aunts covering their mouths. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. I did not need to explain. The image spoke for itself. Matthew slammed his fist against the table, sputtering denials, but no one listened. Madison reached forward desperately, her voice shrill with panic, claiming the video was a setup. Yet every eye in the room had already turned against them. Relatives who once sat quietly now shifted their chairs away, their faces carved with disgust. One uncle muttered under his breath, "Shameful." Another cousin rose abruptly, shaking his head as if he could not bear to remain in the same room. I stood taller, my voice calm, unshaken by their protests. "The truth has been revealed. You tried to strip me of dignity, even of life itself. But Helen's trust protects me still." Their downfall had begun, not by my hand, but by their own greed and malice. And in that moment, the family no longer saw me as a burden. They saw me as the rightful guardian of a legacy too great to be wasted. The heavy doors opened, and two officers entered, their presence silencing the room. One unfolded a warrant, his voice firm as he read aloud. "Investigation into financial fraud and conspiracy to commit poisoning." Madison shrieked, clutching the table, her cry desperate. "She set me up! It's all her trap!" But the eyes fixed on her were cold, unmoved by her tears. Behind the officers came a court officer in a dark suit, carrying a leather folder. He stepped forward and placed the document before Matthew. "This property is subject to foreclosure. The bank has moved to seize the mansion due to unpaid margin debts." The words struck like lightning. Matthew's legs buckled, and he sank to the floor, clutching his head as if trying to block out the truth. His laughter, once loud and arrogant, had vanished into broken gasps. Relatives shifted back, their faces carved with disgust. One whispered, "Shameful," while another rose and walked out, unwilling to stay any longer. Madison's protests grew shrill, but no one listened. The evidence of her plot and the collapse of their fortune were now undeniable. I stood quietly at the end of the table, saying nothing. Their downfall had arrived not by my hand, but by their own greed and malice. In the brilliance of the chandelier, Matthew and Madison knelt humiliated, exposed before the very family whose respect they had craved. Madison thrashed against the tide of judgment, her voice breaking into shrieks. "She trapped me. I did nothing." Her denial rang hollow, crashing uselessly against the mountain of evidence. The security footage, the falsified emails, the butler's trembling testimony, all stood as walls she could not climb. Her power dissolved before her very eyes. I turned toward Nathaniel, whose face was pale with shock, yet steady with sincerity. My voice softened, though it carried the weight of decision. "You are worthy of what your mother left behind. I will help you manage it, so you can give yourself fully to the work you believe in. Together, we will create a global foundation, turning this gold into light for communities everywhere, just as your mother wished." Tears filled Nathaniel's eyes, spilling freely as he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me. His shoulders shook, his voice caught in gratitude too deep for words. "Thank you, Aunt," he whispered, his heart laid bare. In that embrace, the contrast could not have been sharper. On one side, Madison's cries grew weaker, her defiance reduced to nothing but echoes in a room that no longer cared. Matthew crouched in silence, head bowed, shattered by his own greed. And on the other side stood Nathaniel and I, bound not by ambition but by trust, ready to honor Helen's legacy in a way that would outlive wealth itself. Around the long table, silence gave way to nods, soft murmurs of agreement rising from the family. Several aunts dabbed at their eyes, uncles shifted with emotion, and cousins who had once looked at me with doubt now met my gaze with respect. In that moment, the weight of humiliation I had carried was replaced by dignity. My voice echoed in my heart, quiet yet resolute. Greed led them to the abyss, but compassion opens a new road. Justice is not only delivered by the law, it lives in the choices we make about what truly matters. In the weeks that followed, Nathaniel and I stood together in a small press room, announcing the creation of the Helen Foundation. It was not just an institution, but a promise to honor her life and values. The $700 million in gold no longer sat in a cold Swiss vault, hidden and silent. Instead, it was transformed into fuel for the living, a stream of hope funding scholarships for young women, building hospitals in forgotten towns, raising schools where none had stood before. As the plans unfolded, I felt Helen's presence at my side. Her wisdom, her strength, her belief that wealth was a mirror of the soul, all of it lived on in the foundation that bore her name. And for the first time in years, I felt peace, knowing the legacy was not wasted but reborn into light. The first scholarship ceremony was held in a modest auditorium in New York. I stood beside Nathaniel as we handed envelopes to students whose eyes shone with hope. Their gratitude was overwhelming, not for the money itself, but for the chance to rise above the weight of poverty. Months later, Nathaniel sent me photos from Africa, him in a dusty clinic, sleeves rolled up, working alongside volunteer doctors to treat children who had never seen medicine before. His smile was unguarded, genuine, the reflection of his mother's heart. Meanwhile, I traveled to Southeast Asia, walking barefoot through construction sites where new schools were rising from the ground. I watched as walls painted with bright colors replaced ruins, laughter of children echoing where silence had once reigned. News crews began to follow us, cameras capturing each milestone. On television screens across the United States, reporters spoke of the Helen Foundation as a beacon of compassion, calling it the light born from a mother's legacy. I often sat quietly in my apartment, watching those broadcasts with tears welling in my eyes. The gold, once locked away in a cold vault, now lived in textbooks, hospital beds, and roofs over classrooms. It had been transformed, just as Helen had wished, into something greater than wealth. The cycle was complete, the money returned to the community, carrying her spirit into every corner of the world. We sat together on the stone steps of a brand new school, its fresh paint gleaming in the afternoon sun. Children darted across the courtyard, their laughter ringing through the air like music, chasing each other with a joy unbroken by hardship. Nathaniel leaned against my shoulder, his eyes watching the scene with quiet pride. I let the warmth of the moment wash over me, the sound of hammers now replaced by shouts of play. Turning to him, I smiled, my voice soft but steady. Justice and compassion can walk side by side. Sometimes revenge is not the end, it is the beginning of a better future. If this story touched you, share it as a reminder that the greatest inheritance is not gold or silver, but the values we leave behind for the world.